Hello and welcome to the Classic Car Weekly podcast, the sibling podcast to the popular weekly title. I'm this week's host, Jesse Billington, and I'm joined again by editor David Simister and content editor James Dean. Gents, how are we, and how are the classics?
Yeah, having a good time with my classics. The Toyota has had its time belt done, so that's a big job out of the way. So that should keep it going for a bit longer. So the oil changed on it as well. A couple of the bits and bobs done. So keeping me on the road really.
Very nice. James, you and I were just chatting.
Yeah, so we were sort of chewing the fat while we were waiting for David to join us for the podcast. So didn't get as much done as I'd planned because unforeseen family stuff going on. But I think I've worked out the wiring for my Tudor Dynamotor by basically running the all the things I've managed to cobble together into one document and then running it through AI, and it seems to tally up with what I've done. So having given it a test fire, the generator one light seems to have gone out and nothing has sort of caught fire. So I think I'm on the right track with that one. So yeah, getting there, I think.
Promising stuff, indeed. And yeah, relatively quiet in the midget world at the moment. I had it over in Mersey Island over the weekend, little trip away now that it's up and running. And yeah, running sweet as a nut. I did have one issue. We've got a bit of an oil leak coming from around the rocker cover gasket. So I've got a brand new silicone one arrived. So hopefully going to clean that all up this evening and fit this silicone one. Hopefully we get a better seat because I've got a nice alley rocker cover on there that just doesn't seem to bond well to the cork ones. And it did mean that while driving it to and from Essex from Bedfordshire, it was constantly misting the entire engine bay with lovely classic oil. But nothing major as an issue. It's run happily and it hasn't lost a lot of oil doing so. It's just untidy and does mean that whenever I park it somewhere, it just sort of cools down, dripping oil everywhere, which isn't great, but hey. But anyway, classics out the way. We'll jump straight into the lead news story in this week's issue, and this is one revolving around classic car crime and certainly sort of stolen and lost vehicles. This was a story that came from one of our regular sort of writers and contributors, but it's a very interesting one actually because it's not the story you'd anticipate thinking, or you'd like to think that things operate a bit better, James.
Yeah, I mean, this is a follow-up to a story we've run last year about the police system of weeding, which basically winkles out cars that have been stolen. And it's down to the individual forces to keep the police national computer up to date. And if this doesn't happen, then cars disappear off the system. And there is a new system on its way, the Law Enforcement Data Service, which is LEDS, which is due for launch in March. But the people we've spoken to are still concerned that weeding might still be an issue because it hasn't actually been addressed in any of the stuff that we've seen so far. So it's kind of a case of wait and see what happened, going forward.
And obviously, it's annoying that if it can take a long time to track down vehicles, get updates on vehicles. So it's annoying that all of a sudden we seem to have this computer system that just sort of weeds it out if there hasn't been this sort of update that you'd expect. And the numbers that follow this are absolutely staggering. Law Enforcement Data Service, which sort of covers this overarching sort of problem with lost and stolen vehicles, oversees 62.6 million vehicle records, which is partly managed by the Home Office. And we haven't got sort of official numbers for the amount of classics that are being weeded out of the system due to long processes. But it's a system that's live 24 hours a day with access to 13 million personal records. There's a lot to sift through, but it's just obviously one of those unfortunate things where cases that take a lot longer, cars that don't have trackers in them, cars that are harder to identify. It's unfortunate that classics just sort of fall through the net when it comes to this process.
Yeah, I mean, say, as I sort of touched on, it's down to the individual constabulary to confirm the lost or stolen marker. So if a vehicle is reported within 6 weeks, and then if the listing is removed automatically, it's weeded. So basically, stuff just becomes not stolen anymore. So cars just disappear off the record. So it does make it a bit easier for thieves to sort of scurry away with your classic, unfortunately.
And what are the sort of top ways that people can sort of protect against sort of classic theft, and sort of ways that they can also help with recovery?
I mean, we touched on this before. I mean, it's quite simple advice, really. It can be as simple as keep your eyes on your vehicle and keep it somewhere secure. Make sure the garage is somewhere where you regularly wander past it to make sure nothing's happened to it. Maybe fit an alarm. If you're out and about, fit something as simple as a crook lock, which is a visual deterrent. Or people sometimes remove their rotor arm if they sort of go for that sort of hassle with that, or even parking with your wheels facing towards the curb to stop possibly having your vehicle towed away. Other things like a tracking device, I think you just touched upon, also CCTV cameras. And then should the worst happen, I think really what we've seen a lot of people doing is contacting club members and also get stuff onto social media just to get the story shared out there. People on the lookout, people keeping an eye out, seeing a vehicle they might not have seen before. A few people have reported success with that. They've put something onto, say, Facebook, and then other people say, "Oh, I've seen that car." I think there was a Rolls Royce that happened quite recently. There was a young lad who'd seen it after his dad had seen that story online, and that was recovered. But also, I think it's quite important once you've got a vehicle crime number, is just to keep in touch with the police to make sure it doesn't get weeded out of the system.
Yeah, keep that sort of crime number active, keep the case active as much as you possibly can, and that sort of stops the system from essentially automatically forgetting it. I have known when it comes to sort of keeping your vehicle secure, I have known people who take the main lead to the distributor from the ignition coil with them for the day. And again, it's just one of those things that it completely immobilizes the car, really, and it's sort of one of those practical things, a bit like taking the rotor arm with you. David, have you sort of seen some stories when it comes to classics certainly being made too hot to handle when it comes to social media?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really recurring theme we've seen in the classic car movement, is that the ones that tend to get found are the ones where they've been very prolific on social media. People have been posting all over socials and in the pages of CCW, and that helps to keep those eyes in the consciousness of enthusiasts. It's much more likely they get seen and in a lot of cases successfully recovered as well. There are things you can do, as James has mentioned, with tracking devices as well. But the other things to make sure you do as well, there's lots of important. There's a product that the FBHVC recommends called Selector DNA. So that obviously is an ultraviolet marking that you can put on all over your classic car, which marks it with a unique identity. One of the big problems with classic car theft is that a lot of the times when they're stolen, they'll be broken up the parts, and obviously a lot of these parts won't have markers on them, so it's much more difficult to track them if that does happen. Whereas if you're marking them, it's much easier to trace them back to where they've come from. And again, it's simple things like, again, it's keeping an eye out. I mean, we've reported stories where the police have said it was stolen at some point between last Tuesday and 4 years ago, and they've no idea. This car's been off the road in a lockup somewhere. They've no idea when it was stolen because they haven't been keeping an eye on them. And obviously, once that's happened, it's much harder to track them down. So it's all about visibility more than anything else.
Yeah, plenty of good advice there. And it'll be an interesting story to keep an eye on, because obviously there are these changes coming into the system that should hopefully sort of remove these frustrations, but we'll see how progress works, and we'll keep an eye on that one as we move forwards. We'll dive further into the issue. We've got a bumper issue out on sale at the moment. It's a lovely sort of autumn auction themed one, and we've collated some expert tips on sort of the current auction trends, and there are some brilliant ones in here from some big names from all the various auction houses around the UK. And is it good news for the auction scene at the moment, David?
I think so, yeah. It's a very healthy market. We've not seen. I had someone suggesting that the floor had fallen out of the classic car market, which is patently not true. It's we're still seeing lots of people buying and selling classic cars. Prices are remaining relatively stable, but what we have seen, particularly since the end of the pandemic, is the gap between really well restored cars and more average examples that need work. That gap has widened quite significantly over the last few years, and what we've seen is. It's not as easy as saying all classic cars have gone down or all have gone up. It's again, the market doesn't tend to work like that. What we've seen is certain cars are very much in vogue at the moment. Things like your 90s and noughties performance cars, hot hatches, they tend to be doing very well. But that means also there's some good opportunities if you're looking for other types of classic cars. For example, 50s and 60s sports cars, they are cheaper than they were. So if you're looking for something like an MGB or a Healy Sprite or something like that, actually they are generally speaking cheaper than they were at the height of the pandemic. So it's a really good time to go out and buy. So there's lots of opportunities out there at the moment.
And also, I think what was confirmed by talking to a number of the auction experts, it was that you can get a good car these days. You don't necessarily have to buy a project. I think that sort of the project side of things is for somebody who wants to buy a project and get involved and get their hands dirty. But there are some really good cars out there that you can buy without having to go through all that rigmarole.
I think there's an interesting thing that sort of came out of the recent HCVA conference I was at. There'll be more of that in a future issue, which came from Rob Hubbard, who we actually feature in this piece, and he was talking about the way that a younger generation is buying classic cars differently and looking for these more sort of turnkey, ready-to-go cars, and that could be something that is fueling that sort of gap in the prices. So there's certainly some interesting trends appearing, and there's some great points that have been sort of coming out. I love the point that James Dennison makes when it comes to sort of the things he's seen through Brightwells, and a lot of pre-war cars that he is selling, it's the smaller, more simple cars that are really sort of snapping up buyers, and it's great news when it comes to saving those sort of more easily forgotten everyday marks and models from that time period.
I think one of the things they take from this is like it's actually quite a positive when people kind of forget about a certain type of classic like pre-war stuff. It can be like, oh well, no, they're not worth what they want, what they once were, and you can get into that sort of doom and gloom side of it. But actually, if you wait a little while and you open your eyes and you're a little bit more open to a different type of classic, you can see there's opportunities to own stuff you wouldn't normally own. I think the whole pre-war thing. I know just speak to myself. I know that Jesse, you're also a little bit that way inclined. That suddenly you think, actually, I can afford something that's fun and interesting and not break the bank.
Mm. Yeah, there's definitely the pre-war sector is definitely one that keeps sort of picking up my ears, and sort of I keep looking at it, seeing what prices are doing, because yeah, I would like an Austin 7 Special or something along those lines. Again, it's that very rudimentary engineering, but it's becoming incredibly affordable. And again, the club support, the part support makes looking after and running these cars on a regular basis a lot more attainable than it once was, even when I started Classic Car Weekly 3 years ago or so. It's hugely changed in that time frame. But it's more good auction news, David. You've put together a great set of auction buys for this autumn as well. And I was curious as to what led you down the pathways to pick these choices. Were these cars that are sort of seeing strong prices on the horizon, or are these cars that are starting to tail off?
I think with all of them, the theme is essentially these are the 10 cars in this week's issue, which I think are particularly good value for, and there's lots of different reasons. And one that jumps out at me is WB and Sons are selling next weekend a Triumph Stag. It's a lovely example, but the problem is the chap who owned it, he moved house and lost all the history. So again, history is a really key thing with cars. We know that it helps to improve the value, and unfortunately this car no longer has that, so the estimate for it is £8,000 to £10,000, which actually for a Stag, that's actually pretty good value for one that's in really good condition. So again, if it were me, I'd be going along there, having a look at it, having a look at the condition alone. Chances are it's probably going to be as good as it's described. It's going to be a really sound example, but because it hasn't got that history, it might not have as much competition as one that does have that provenance, and so potentially there might be a bit of a bargain buy there. Again, there's lots of different examples of cars. We were talking about pre-war cars a moment ago. There's a Wolseley Hornet Special that's going through. This is one of the very few Jensen bodied cars, and the estimate of that's only 6 to 8 grand. I mean, that's that's an absolute bargain compared to an MG or a Morgan in the same sort of condition. So there's if you look around, actually, maybe not look at some of the more obvious candidates. There's actually some really good buys out there right now.
Yeah, James, is there anything that's really jumped out to you from that selection that you would sort of contemplate putting some money down for and sort of walking away from an auction happy?
To be honest with you, I'm quite open-minded. I mean, I know I'm an air-cooled guy, but I think if I was going to be buying something new, I would just be looking at going really open-minded. I think I would just look what I can afford and see what's out there. I think, as we already touched upon, I think the pre-war section is the bit that's kind of got me kind of most wild up at the moment. I think, yeah, I'll be looking pre-war.
Some nice bits and pieces. I was going to say that Jaguar Mark II is really reasonably priced as well, for considering what most Mark IIs tend to go for or have been going for recently. I think the one that Manor Park have got coming up could start to set a bit of an interesting trend when it comes to prices on those. But Reliant Scimitar GTE, £4,000 to £6,000 at Anglia Car Auctions is very promising, and it does look fantastic in white. I think you're right there, David. It looks absolutely spectacular. So there's an interesting spread of cars and even some modern classics creeping in there as well. The two 2004 entrants in the VW Lupo GTI, very rare car, didn't make a lot of those, and the MG ZT260 V8. That's the 4.7 that you found in the Mustang of the same period as well, I think. So it's a fairly potent little unit, and again, an interesting car that rarely comes to market and is now up for no reserve.
Yeah, again, that potentially could be a bit of a bargain. I mean, those MGs. I mean, I've driven a few of them, and they are fantastic. It's a really proper nod to MG sporting heritage, and yeah, I think it's someone, if they get that car for sort of Anglia Car Auction sold a really nice one for 17. I mean, it's not going to go for that much, but certainly if they can get it for sort of anything, if they can get it for under 10, I mean, that'd be a fantastic car to knock around in.
Well, for under 10, I think that'd be an absolute steal. I think there'd be
Yeah, wouldn't it?
yeah, if you're walking away having spent, I'd say even less than 13, you're doing well
Yeah.
for yourself with a car that's that enjoyable. And again, they're fairly easy to stay on top of mechanically because it is just Ford Mustang running gear, and that is parts are out there for those bits and pieces. There are some top choices when it comes to the auction scene at the moment. And obviously we've covered over a lot of auction bits and pieces in this week's issue. We've got a huge autumn price guide, sorry, which covers pretty much everything under £50,000 and more than 1,000 models spread out across several pages with price trackers for some of the big classic risers as well in there, as well as checks for if you are heading to auction and looking for something a little bit interesting, including my favorite Midget 1500. So it's a great time to be in the market and looking for things. I don't know if anyone else has got anything to add that sort of stood out to them in this week's issue.
I think it's a really good mix of there's plenty of garage tools and accessories as well. So if you are in the business of getting yourself a car and you want to do a bit of fettling, again, have a look at that too, because there's lots of good advice in there. Maybe things to add to the Christmas shopping list.
Yeah, there's some top and clever choices and suggestions in that one. Actually, I did have a leaf through that, and there are some good bits and pieces that I really ought to start adding to my collection. James, anything that jumped out to you in this week's issue that you thought was a particularly interesting read?
As a fan of the Z cars, in the news section, we have the reborn Datsun 240Zs that are being launched by a Dutch company. I think that's a very interesting proposition, and the chance to own a factory fresh as new Z car would be quite tempting.
Yeah, very, very pretty cars. And there is sort of a growing trend for these sort of re-engineered classics. And having recently had a sort of mooch round Jaguar Land Rover's classic sort of HQ, seeing what they're doing when it comes to their Defender line, there are some very interesting cars coming out there. And there's certainly a market for them, even though those Defenders start at nearly £250,000 for a Defender. It's steep money. I was going to say it's an absolutely jam-packed issue. Obviously, I'm going to be a bit biased when it comes to picking out favourites because the Hour Classic section does have the first big update on my Midget when I was doing the engine build. So plenty of interesting bits and pieces in there. So that's an obviously biased choice, but I quite like the story that came out on page 40, which looks at Golf's big journey, which is sort of encouraging classic car owners to get out and about late in the season and sort of head out on just sort of an ambling tour around sort of, I think it was mostly the south of the UK, and some great cars spotted out on forecourts as well, which was nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the photos that we ran in there, I mean, if you black and whited them, made them black and white, then it looks like a forecourts of old, isn't it? Some of those photos.
I love the sort of lead shot on that one with the West Sussex Stag Owners Club, because you barely see sort of a modern car tucked in the back of shot. You could wind the clock back and it would be hugely reminiscent of years gone by. It is absolutely fantastic. As we've said, there is plenty crammed into this week's bumper issue of Classic Car Weekly, including 3 The Way We Were's. So if you love your history, there's certainly something to pick up there. And also we've got a live show report from the Resto show at Stoneleigh, which proved to be incredibly busy and incredibly popular as well. So great to see the show scene still thriving late in the year. Otherwise, that's all we've got time for on this week's episode of the Classic Car Weekly podcast. We'll be back with another edition and another issue next week, speaking of which we ought to get on with putting that together for you. Gents, thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure as always.
No problem.
and we'll be back with another edition of Classic Car Weekly soon.